Alors, bon matin tout le monde et bienvenue ce matin à une conférence de presse avec le chef du NPD, Jagmeet Singh, le député néo-démocrate pour St. John's-Est, Jack Harris, candidate pour St. John's-Est, Mary Shortall, et candidat pour le NPD pour St. John's-Sud, Mount Pearl, Ray Critch. On va juste attendre quelques secondes pour que tout le monde puisse se connecter en ligne avant de commencer. Jack, please go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, folks, for coming out to help us welcome Jagmeet Singh back again to St. John's East and St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador as part of his Atlantic tour. We are very pleased that he is with us. And we have, of course, as was mentioned in the intro, two very special guests here you'll hear from Mary shortly, but Ray Critch is the nominated candidate for St. John's South Mount Pearl, and of course Mary Shortall has just been nominated for the district of St. John's East. Now, you know, an election has been called. It's been called for October of 2023. And when I was elected, along with Jagmeet and 24 New Democrats in the fall of 2019, we were elected for a term of office that was to end then. But there's persistent rumors that there may be an election sooner, and therefore we're required to be ready for that. We've been very busy over the last since the fall of 2019, fighting to make sure that the appropriate response to the pandemic was being brought forward by the government, and Jagmeet will certainly talk a little more about that now and throughout the campaign. And we're ready to continue to serve, as am I. But as you know, I've announced that I won't be running in the next election, and that's why we've proceeded to have a new selection for a nomination for St. John's East. I'm very proud to introduce Mary Shortall, who will be the next Member of Parliament for St. John's East, and ask her if she would introduce Jagmeet Singh for today's event. So thank you very much, and Mary, you go right ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this vibrant, diverse, beautiful part of our country, the federal riding of St. John's East on the island of Newfoundland, which is the stolen ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. We also recognize Labrador and the Innu and Inuit as the original peoples of that big land, Indigenous elders, both past and present, and thank them for hosting us here this morning. I'm Mary Shortall, and I'm thrilled and so honored to be the recently nominated NDP candidate for St. John's East, and to be joined by Ray Critch, NDP candidate for our neighboring riding of St. John's South Mount Pearl. Thank you so much, Jack, for your amazing words as usual. The people of St. John's East, and indeed the entire province, have been blessed to have you in our corner for more than 30 years. Thank you all for coming out here today to hear an important message from our leader and our party. I'm here today because I know that workers and their families are struggling. They need someone in their corner fighting for them. It's been harder to keep up as wages stay the same and good jobs with benefits become harder and harder to find. Sadly, for the last 6 years, the Liberals have not done much to make life any easier for working families. Justin Trudeau wants to look like he cares. He says the right things, but when it comes to really helping Canadians, he has to be forced to provide real support. Over the last 6 years, he could have taken real action against stagnating wages, but he chose not to. Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats are different. He has shown what it means to send New Democrats to Ottawa. The people of this riding have seen that benefit firsthand. If we want different results, we need to make different choices. Jagmeet is focused on getting results for Canadians. He's fighting for the support that people need now. And New Democrats are winning results, getting more, help to more people, and faster. That's why I'm so excited to be here today and to introduce a fearless leader, a leader that has the courage to fight for better. Please join me in welcoming our leader, Jagmeet Singh.
Thanks so much, Mary. I'm really, really honored to be here. And I want to thank Jack Harris, who's been such an incredible voice for so many people. And for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, he's been such a fighter. I want to also thank Mary Shortall for her words today and for being our next candidate for St. John's East, and Ray Critch, who's going to be an incredible candidate for St. John's South, Mount Pearl. We know that we've been dealing with a pandemic, which has been really difficult. It's been hard on a lot of people. And while Justin Trudeau wants to just act like it's over, it's not over. And people are still worried. I want to thank everyone who's gotten vaccinated. That's a big step forward for us to be able to get past this pandemic. But people are still worried. They're worried about their kids. Today, the plan was just announced about the province's plan for kids getting back to school. I know people are worried about their kids. People are worried about their elders and a potential flu season. People are worried. And they're still concerned about what this pandemic means for them, their jobs, and their future. And if Justin Trudeau was listening to people and their concerns and their worries, he would not be holding a selfish summer election. Instead, he would be heeding our call and the call of Canadians to keep on delivering the help that people need, fighting for the help that Canadians need at this point in time. But while we've been dealing with the pandemic and the crisis of the pandemic, there are so many other crises that continue to impact Canadians, people here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I should also mention it's a great honor to be back in my childhood town, a town that I grew up in when I was a kid, spent a lot of time in my formative years. Someone mentioned maybe that's the reason why I've been able to connect with people, is because I learned from the greatest connectors, the people who have got great hospitality and warmth, when I learned that here in St. John's. But while we've been dealing with the pandemic, we know there's a number of crises that are still in front of us. We know that the climate crisis is raging and people are feeling the impacts of that crisis right now. We've seen forest fires in the interior of BC and in Ontario. I spent some time in the interior and saw thick clouds of smoke that obscured the sky. You couldn't see the sun. People were struggling to breathe the air. We know that that impacts people across the world with forest fires raging around the world. We also know of flooding and intense periods of drought and heat. Climate crisis is real. And things have only gotten worse in the past 6 years. Our emissions as a nation have gone up over the past 6 years. We know that housing is at a crisis. People can't find a place to call home. People can't afford a place that's in their budget, whether to rent or to own. This crisis has only gotten worse over the past 6 years. And we know healthcare is a particular crisis that impacts the Atlantic region. I've been touring across the Atlantic provinces and I've heard from people who've told me how much they're worried. They can't get access to a doctor. They can't get the help they need. And we know that here in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's a serious crisis. But this pandemic has exacerbated, made it worse. We know that people are dealing with the mental health impacts of this pandemic, and mental health services are so difficult to access. We know that the opioid crisis hasn't gone away, and in fact, it's become worse over this pandemic, and it's even harder for people. We are losing Canadians to this crisis. These crises have only gotten worse again over the past number of years. And we know that Indigenous people, the first people of this land, have continued to face injustice. Recently here in Newfoundland and Labrador, the Innu people were completely left out of negotiations, were not even consulted at all. An ongoing example of the injustice that Indigenous people suffer. The fact that in a country as wealthy as ours, that Indigenous people can't access clean drinking water is so shameful. The fact that this government continues to fight Indigenous kids in court is completely inexcusable. And the fact that basic human rights are not something Indigenous people can count on is something we have to be committed to fixing. And when we discovered those Indigenous children found in unmarked graves, our hearts broke, but we need to change and channel that pain into action and implement all the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. Really what's been happening, and it's sad to say, is that people are paying the price of Justin Trudeau's refusal to do the things that he promised that he would do over the past 6 years. I want folks to know we fought for you. We fought for you every step of the way in this pandemic. When people needed help, we were there. We fought to make sure CERB was there for people. We fought to double it. The Liberals wanted to start at $1,000. We fought to double that to $2,000. That meant nearly 8 million Canadians had the money they needed to stay at home and to be able to put food on the table, to stay in their homes in this crisis. We also fought hard to increase the wage subsidy which started at 10%, which we knew was not enough to keep people employed. We fought hard to increase that to 75%, ensuring that millions of people kept their jobs. The same way we fought for you and your families in the pandemic, we commit to you to fight for you moving forward in the recovery. And that's why we're laying out our vision for the future. What is a New Democrat vision? Well, we know that people are worried about the cost of this pandemic. They're worried about the cost of the recovery. We are the only party stating clearly and unequivocally the burden shouldn't fall on you and your families. It shouldn't fall on small businesses that have already struggled so much. We are going to ask the ultra rich to finally start paying their fair share and invest that into people. Imagine if we could invest those extra resources into creating good jobs to help us fight the climate crisis. We could invest in better healthcare that covered you truly from head to toe. If we could invest in fighting for justice for Indigenous people, in cleaning water, in making sure that we deliver on the services that people need. That's the choice that we have, and that's the vision that we have for Canada, making the ultra rich pay their fair share so we can invest in people. We know, and I hope you've seen, New Democrats have been fighting for you every step of the way. We know that better is possible, and we are ready for better, and we want to achieve that together. Donc, mes amis, on sait que la pandémie est toujours là. On est dans une pandémie, c'est tellement difficile. Et Justin Trudeau veut faire déclencher une élection, mais c'est une décision qui aide seulement son parti, mais ce n'est pas ce que les gens veulent voir. Donc, on encourage Justin Trudeau de ne pas faire déclencher une élection, mais on est prêt s'il fait cette décision. Mais pendant ces temps difficiles, cette pandémie qui était tellement dure pour les gens, on sait qu'il y a des autres crises aussi. La crise climatique frappe fort avec des feux de forêt. On sait qu'il y a une crise de logement qui continue de créer des problèmes pour les gens, de trouver une maison, un logement abordable. On sait qu'il y a toujours une crise dans nos soins de santé, particulièrement pour la santé mentale et les soins de longue durée. Donc, ces situations, et en particulier la crise climatique, étaient plus difficiles. La situation s'empirait depuis les 6 ans. Et c'est clair qu'on doit prendre des actions concrètes pour régler ce problème. Et effectivement, la situation s'est causée par le fait que Justin Trudeau dit une chose et faire complètement l'opposé. Il a dit que la crise climatique est importante, mais il a exempté les grands pollueurs et continue d'avoir le mauvais bilan dans tous les pays G7. On peut faire mieux. Et une grande question qui soulève, c'est quoi notre vision pour l'avenir? Notre vision, c'est qu'on doit s'assurer que les ultra-riches paient le juste part pour investir dans les gens. Imaginez ce qu'on peut faire si on ose ensemble, ce qu'on peut faire si on investit dans la création des bons emplois qui font face à la crise climatique, si on investit dans nos soins de longue durée, si on investit dans notre soins de santé, si on prend les priorités des gens et prend des actions concrètes pour réaliser ce que les gens ont besoin. C'est exactement notre vision, une vision pour un avenir où on s'assure que les autoriches paient le juste part pour investir dans les gens. On sait qu'on peut le faire ensemble et si on ose ensemble, on peut faire tout ça. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much and I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. So we will start with questions on location. Andrea, if you want to go ahead and give the first question, just a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up. Thank you very much.
We'll start.
Hi, Mark Quinn from NDP here in St. John's. Welcome to St. John's.
Thanks so much.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, oil industry is very important to Newfoundland and Labrador, and Canada's the 4th largest producer of oil. What would the NDP government mean to the oil? Getting off the oil industry?
Thank you for the question. We know that there is no future in fighting the climate crisis unless we center that around workers. We as New Democrats, a party of workers, founded by workers, will never leave workers behind. But we know a lot of the workers in resource sectors are worried about the ups and downs, the busts and booms, the unpredictability of their jobs, and they deserve better. So we are going to commit to investing in creating jobs right now. We've spoken with workers and leaders and union members in the oil and gas sector, in resource sectors, and they need to see jobs created now, not in a distant future. So a lot of our plans, making sure we retrofit commercial buildings, industrial buildings, is a way to create jobs right now. We need to invest in renewable energy. We know that there's a direction that the world is headed. The global markets are headed, and we also know there's a reality of the climate crisis. This means we have to be serious about a plan to create good jobs that are here for the long term and that create good opportunities for work. We can do that if we make the right decisions.
Your response sounds a lot like what Seamus O'Regan said. What you're going to do be different from what the Liberals have promised to do?
Well, they haven't actually done anything. The difference is we get it done. The Liberals have been all talk. What have they done actually in terms of investing in real jobs for resource sector workers in the past 6 years? We've got the evidence. They haven't. I've spoken with workers and we're no better off. Our situation has not changed. They talk a big talk about the climate, but they continue to exempt the biggest polluters. They put a price on pollution, sure, which is a good step, but they exempted the biggest polluters. How does that make sense? And they haven't made the investments to create the jobs right now. And that's why people are worried. They're saying, I don't want this unpredictable future made even worse with these vague promises. Let's create those jobs now. And we're saying, let's invest in retrofitting buildings and homes that we can do that right away. Let's invest in renewable energy and let's create those good jobs so the workers aren't worried about an uncertain future.
What happens to the Atlantic Loop if NDP's elected?
The Atlantic?
Atlantic Loop, the plan to use energy from Newfoundland, Labrador through the Atlantic provinces.
Well, we know that there is a reality that we're up against, and we've got to create real sustainability for people and for workers. And so our plan is to make sure we make those investments, we create good jobs, and we're no longer caught up in the volatility of the commodities market, which has meant that there's been a lot of uncertainty for workers. And we know that there's a direction the world is headed in. If we don't make those investments today, if we don't make real investments today, our workers will get left behind. And I don't want that to be the case.
We're going to move now to the next question.
Glenn Whitman from Telegram Software Network.
Hey, the first newspaper I ever appeared in was in the Telegram when I was about 6 years old, I think, or 5 years old.
Perfect. The oil and gas, offshore oil and gas sector is still a big part of the economy in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the greener economy, what's the NDP plan to transition workers as we move from oil and gas to a greener economy?
Well, first off, we know that these workers want good jobs, and these jobs have to be there now. And we've seen a lot of talk about this, and the Liberals haven't delivered in the past 6 years. So we're saying something really clear. Let's see those investments happen immediately. Retrofitting buildings and homes will create good jobs for those workers. We need to invest in renewable energy right now. We need to see those investments immediately. And so our plan is we want to make sure there can be no plan to fight the climate crisis unless workers are at the heart of it, unless workers see a clear plan that lays out a path for them to have good jobs. That's what we are. We are a workers' party, and we're going to make sure workers are never left behind.
We have questions about our healthcare. Some people are calling it crisis in our healthcare system now, shortage of nurses and things. How does the NDP plan to help us in that respect?
It's no surprise that the people in Newfoundland and Labrador are in a healthcare crisis. The past Liberal and Conservative governments have been slashing funding for healthcare. So it is no surprise that we are in this crisis now. The lack of funding directly erodes our ability to deliver good care. And so one of the first things New Democrats are committed to is investing back in our public healthcare. We believe in it. New Democrats fought for universal healthcare because we believe no one should have to worry about whether they can get care based on the amount of money they earn, what's in their bank account. We believe in that. I've seen the impacts of that directly in my own life. And so we are committed to increasing investments in healthcare broadly, but specifically one of the big gaps in our healthcare system continues to be that people get sick and they're prescribed medication to stay healthy and they can't afford it. They simply can't afford their medication. And that's millions of Canadians. And when they can't afford their medication, what happens? We know what happens. People get more and more sick and they end up in the emergency room. They end up having more and more worse and worse illnesses. If we can invest in universal pharmacare, that will also alleviate some of the burden on our healthcare system. People won't get as sick. People will be healthier. We won't see as many people in the emergency room, and we can make investments to improve our healthcare system. Hey there.
There's an agreement in principle right now on rate mitigation between Ottawa and the province. Does the NDP plan to stand by that current agreement?
There's no question that we need to be there for Newfoundland and Labrador. So the rate mitigation is something we support, but we think we can do more. And I mentioned healthcare. There are a lot of places where Newfoundland and Labrador need investments. Healthcare is another massive concern, and why we want to be there in a meaningful way. And we're also the only party that can back up this commitment to investing more in the people and the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, because we're the only party talking about increasing revenue, basically taxing the ultra rich so that we can pay for the investments that people need. We are the only ones talking about doing that.
So you're saying some of that investment or the taxing the ultra rich, that would go towards some of the rate mitigation?
Well, I'm saying that we need to see more than just rate mitigation. We need to see investments in healthcare. We need to see investments in building more affordable housing. We need to see investments in making life better for people, like making life more affordable. And we're the only party with a plan to actually afford to do that, because we're saying we're going to tax the billionaires and millionaires who get away with not paying their fair share, who get away with using offshore tax havens to hide their profits, who have companies like Amazon that make record profits in Canada that pay virtually no tax here. We're the only ones saying we're going to make sure they pay their fair share so we can invest that into the needs of the people. Yeah.
This whole thing surge kind of fizzled out on you last night. You ended up in fourth place. So what are you going to do differently this time to try to break through in areas such as Toronto and win back seats in places like BC and Quebec?
When I was a kid here in St. John's, I learned something really important. You never take people's support for granted. You got to earn their trust. You got to earn it by fighting for it. And so what I've done throughout this pandemic, what our team has done is we've shown people what you get with New Democrats. We are there for you. In what has been one of the worst crises that our country has faced in a generation, what has the Conservative Party done for people? What have they done to make your life better? They can't point to a single victory they fought for and won to make people's lives better. In the worst crisis that we face in a generation, it's a pretty dismal record. And the Liberals wanted to do the minimum. They wanted to, first of all, they wouldn't bring in CERB. We fought to bring it in. And then they wanted to bring it in at $1,000. We doubled that to $2,000. That was New Democrats. They wanted to bring the wage subsidy at 10%, which would not have saved any jobs. Workers tell us that all the time, that we were only able to continue to work because the wage subsidy was at 75%. We saved millions of jobs. So we want to earn the trust of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, the people of the Atlantic region, and of all Canada by showing we have fought for you in this pandemic and we will continue to fight for you. We don't take your votes for granted. We don't assume that you'll just vote for us just because of our party. We want to earn that trust, earn that vote by fighting for you now and in the future.
Much of your platform sounds remarkably similar to 2019 and things you've already announced. If it didn't get you the votes and the seats you wanted last time, how do you think it's going to work for you when an election is called?
I think that the things that we called for in 2019 have only become more and more important. Healthcare has always been an important thing for people. This pandemic has exposed the problems in our healthcare system, has exposed that we were not prepared for a pandemic, and it showed that there's been a massive gap in the investments we need to make sure healthcare is there for people when they need it. We know that pharmacare is something we campaigned on. We know that people need to have access to medication. That only became worse in the pandemic. People lost their jobs, many people lost their benefits, and it shouldn't be this gamble that if you've got the right job at the right benefit, you get your medication covered, but if you don't, then you're left out high and dry. So those same commitments are even more important than ever. We committed to build affordable homes that people can actually afford, that are in their budget. That has become even more of a crisis. So a lot of the things that we talked about before, we knew were concerns, have only become worse. And we are committed to making them better for people, for workers, and for their families.
My name is Sarah. I'm with Canadian Press. I'm wondering,
Hi there.
in your plan announced, or in the NDP plan, what are, if you could sum up the overarching theme in one or two words, what would they be?
Tax the ultra rich to invest in people. That's our plan. And really, no other party is willing to say those words. And really, if that is not the plan, if it's not going to be that the billionaires pay their fair share, we have seen what happens. Governments have done one of two things. Either they cut the help that people need, or they put the burden back on the very same workers and families and small businesses that suffered. We are the only ones saying it does not have to be that way. If we make the ultra rich pay their fair share, we can invest in the things that people need.
I also wanted to ask you, building on Chris's question, what do you think is different about the plan this time around
than in 2019?
This time around, we've got a track record. We can really point to some concrete victories that we have fought for and won that made people's lives better. People in this country are better off because New Democrats were there. There's no argument about that. Canadians are better off because we fought to make sure the wage subsidy was higher. By doing that, we saved millions of jobs. We would have also made sure that the wage subsidy didn't go to a company that exploited it, or that offshore jobs, or that increased executive pay, or that paid out dividends. That's what we would have done differently. But we were able to save millions of jobs. We were also able to keep people that were struggling in their homes so they can afford to pay their bills and afford to put food on the table. We can show in a real concrete way that millions of Canadians are better off because New Democrats were there for them. And I want you to know that we also need to look forward. And if we're left to just 4 more years of Justin Trudeau, he's going to say a lot of great things in a campaign, which he often does, and then not deliver, and people are going to end up being hurt. We want to make sure we deliver on these things, and we know the only way to do that is to make sure the ultra wealthy pay their fair share, and that's something that no one else is willing to talk about, and we are committed to doing.
Brian Callahan, VOCM.
Hey, yes.
I just wanted to go back to Kellyanne's question. You briefly touched on rate mitigation agreement in principle, but just specifically, judging by the agreement we've seen, does the NDP fully support this particular agreement specific to the rate mitigation?
Well, the major problem with the rate mitigation, the reason why I've been raising concerns is that some of the most impacted are the Inuit people that were completely left out of this negotiation. So that's my major problem. It's again another example of this Liberal government saying that Indigenous people are the most important relationship, but then completely failing to have any sort of work with, consultations with Indigenous people. So that's a major concern. The principle, though, of stepping in and providing support for Newfoundland and Labradorians so that they don't have to worry about bearing the burden of increased price of electricity, absolutely. That principle, New Democrats believe we need to be there to step in and find a way to support. But the current approach of the Liberal government is one I'm concerned with, and that's why I've raised concerns, but absolutely being there financially to support people and their lives and the affordability in their lives, no question.
And just on a light note, we've mentioned a few times your childhood here. Can you just give people an idea where you grew up, where you went to school, and that sort of thing?
Sure, yeah. I would say the biggest part of my childhood, I lived right across the street from Bowring Park, which there is some debate in my household if it was called Boring Park or Bowring Park. Still a debate out there. I don't think it should be called boring because it was one of the most fun parks I've ever been to. And my brother and I actually went back. So this is where we used to play. I learned how to swim in the pool that used to be there. It was different before when I was a kid. It was like, I think, an open public pool. And now the structure's been improved, I think. But it's where I learned how to ride my bike because it was safe. We lived across the street, so there wasn't a lot of place to ride. So we'd take the bike across into the park. So really, my childhood was in Bowring Park. It's where I spent a lot of my time. And I mentioned the telegram. My brother, my sister, and I were playing right when the long Newfoundland winter finally broke, and we were playing outdoors, and there was an article that ran, the first sights of kids being outdoors in the spring, which was still pretty snowy, I think. But yeah, lots of great memories here, and a lot of the things that I still love to do. I love to swim, and I love to ride my bike. I want to say is maybe because I learned it here that it become such a big part of who I am. Thanks so much.
We will now move to questions from members of the media on Zoom. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions des médias qui se sont joints à nous via Zoom. Please use the raise hand function to ask a question and follow up. J'invite les membres des médias de veuiller utiliser la fonction lever la main pour poser une question et une question de suivi. We will start with Alex Belingo with the Toronto Star. Please go ahead.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, maybe over there. Not sure what time it is now, but thanks very much for taking our questions.
Thanks. Afternoon, but definitely thanks.
Afternoon, good afternoon. Yeah, so just on the idea of raising revenues from raising taxes on the ultra wealthy. Obviously, the federal government has this massive deficit right now. This document of commitments you've laid out today has a bunch of expensive promises in it, new programs. How sure are you that the taxes that you would raise, the revenues you would raise through raising these taxes would cover all these new programs and also be able to handle, I assume you'd want to decline the deficit over the long term, like the other parties. How would you manage all that? How confident are you that these tax increases would raise enough revenue for all of that?
I really appreciate the question. To put it really bluntly, no other party can make any commitment to invest in people without either cutting existing services or putting the burden back on people. We're the only ones with a plan that says it doesn't have to be that way. By laying out a plan to close the loopholes, to put in a wealth tax, to make sure companies like Amazon are actually paying their fair share, we are the only party with a credible plan to actually invest in people. And so there will be investments made, and we know that there are some crucial things we've got to invest in, but we're the only party talking about how we can pay for it by making the billionaires pay their fair share for once.
And I just wanted to go back to, I know a version of this question was asked, but you took a very similar platform into the 2019 election, and you guys lost 15 seats. You were saying much of the same things. It was framed the same way. The pitch was very similar: raise taxes, expand healthcare. I know you're saying that these things have become more important in your view, but how do you convince Canadians that saw the same thing on the menu last time and didn't vote for you that they should choose these items on the menu this time?
Sometimes you look at items on the menu and you say, you know what, maybe I should have bought that thing last time. And that's what we're hoping people realize, that all the things we talked about are the things that people need now more than ever. Like it's no exaggeration to say every single crisis that has happened in addition to the pandemic has only gotten worse. The climate crisis has gotten worse. We know that the housing crisis has gotten worse. The healthcare crisis has become worse. On every front, these things have gotten worse. We are worse off. Less Canadians can afford their medication. Our healthcare is struggling. And these things have happened because of bad decisions over the past 6 years. And we know there's a way forward. And I am really, really hopeful and optimistic about that. I know if we made these better choices, we would get better results. People would be better off. And so I'm committed to that. I know that people deserve better. I know that better is possible. And I'm laying out a vision for how we can achieve that. A vision that I believe in strongly. And I know Canadians want to see. They want to see some hope. It's been a pretty dark time. People want to see some hope. And here's a path forward. We know that the billionaires of this world are not paying their fair share. They're spending time up in space, going on luxury rides on rocket ships. People want to see them pay their fair share so we can invest in the things that people need. And that's what we're going to do.
Nous allons maintenant à Juliane Lapointe avec Radio-Canada. C'est à vous. Il se peut que vous soyez encore sur sourdine.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui. Bonjour.
Bon. Bonjour. Désolée pour ça. Donc, j'aimerais vous entendre sur le passeport vaccinal. Le gouvernement Trudeau qui a annoncé qu'il va y avoir ce passeport vaccinal pour les voyageurs canadiens. J'aimerais savoir ce que vous en pensez. Est-ce que vous croyez que ça va assez loin? Est-ce que c'est une bonne approche?
Je pense qu'on doit avoir un tel système qui fonctionne à travers le pays pour un système national. Pourquoi créer un document seulement pour les voyageurs internationaux? Pourquoi pas avoir ce même document qui fonctionne à travers le pays? À ce moment, je suis ici dans les provinces atlantiques. J'ai eu besoin de montrer ma preuve que j'étais vacciné quand j'ai visité l'île Prince-Édouard. J'ai aussi dois montrer la preuve à Nouveau-Brunswick, ici à Terre-Neuve et Labrador. Donc, pourquoi pas avoir un document qui montre cette preuve qui fonctionne à travers le pays? Le niveau fédéral, Justin Trudeau doit montrer le leadership pour dire clairement que oui, on peut créer ce document qui pourra être utilisé pour les Canadiens qui voyagent à travers le pays aussi, ou pour les événements comme on a entendu au Québec. Ils ont annoncé qu'ils vont faire quelque chose de similaire pour avoir accès aux certains événements. Pourquoi pas avoir un document fédéral qui nous aide en travaillant avec les provinces qui fonctionne pour montrer cette preuve?
In English, please.
Absolutely, we should have. I mean, the idea of, so the Liberal government is proposing a document that proves that you're vaccinated only for international travelers. Why not have that document accessible to Canadians so they can travel across Canada? I already just recently traveled into a number of provinces where we had to show proof of our vaccination just to enter. And I think that's a great idea. Why not then make that document available federally, produce it quickly and rapidly so that Canadians can use that in travel across our country and within our provinces and within the territories? It makes sense. And the federal government should step up and deliver a document like that that can be used in Canada, not just for traveling internationally.
Maintenant, il y a quand même des provinces qui sont contre. On pense à l'Ontario, l'Alberta, sont contre un passeport vaccinal pour usage domestique. Est-ce que vous croyez que le gouvernement fédéral devrait imposer ce passeport-là, même pour les provinces qui n'en veulent pas?
La décision d'avoir un critère d'être vacciné pour entrer les prémices, c'est la juridiction des provinces. Mais ce que je dis, c'est le document pourrait être livré par le gouvernement fédéral pour aider les provinces qui font ces décisions ou pour aider les voyageurs. Si je suis en Ontario et je veux voyager au Québec, mais je n'ai pas un document parce que ce n'est pas nécessaire en Ontario, ça crée un défi pour les gens qui veulent voyager dans les autres provinces où il y a ce besoin ou cette nécessité. Donc, ce que je dis clairement, c'est qu'on doit avoir un document qui pourrait être utilisé à travers les pays, dans les provinces où c'est un besoin, une nécessité, ou sinon, mais c'est un outil pour nous aider, pour rendre la vie plus facile, pour rendre accès dans les autres provinces plus facile. Ça a du sens et je pense qu'on doit le faire.
We will now go to Mary Brooke with the Island Social Trends. Please go ahead.
Hi, Jagmeet. Thanks for doing this session across the country.
Thank you.
Yeah, so to get through the last year and a half, this difficult pandemic, a lot of seniors took the CERB and then CRB if they were self-employed. And now they're finding out, like just with letters in the last few weeks, that they've lost their guaranteed income supplement if they were relatively low income. And so that immediately made a challenge to pay rent or even groceries for some of them. So I'm just wondering if this can be corrected quickly before there is an election. Otherwise, some of these people may have to go to the end of the year before legislation can change this.
I really appreciate this question. We've actually written a letter demanding this change immediately. Just to highlight what's going on for folks that don't know, what's happening is literally horrible. We've got Justin Trudeau that's going after vulnerable seniors. People that receive GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, are among some of the most vulnerable seniors, some of the poor seniors. And what Justin Trudeau is basically doing is clawing back the GIS from these seniors. And at the same time, we've got hundreds of large corporations that took public money that we clearly can prove paid out dividends to their shareholders, meaning they didn't need to take that money in the first place. So Justin Trudeau's letting those companies off the hook. They're not getting any letters in the mail saying they've got to repay the public money, the millions and millions of dollars that they took. But a senior that needed CERB to get through this pandemic is getting a letter saying they're going to have their GIS clawed back. That is just offensive. It's so wrong. And we wrote a letter to say that this has to be reversed immediately. But it really lets you know what Justin Trudeau is all about. Like, why would he allow seniors to see their vital resources being cut, but allow some of the wealthiest companies to continue to have taken public money and not pay that back?
And in your vision document, it covers a wide range of things. What's the most important, or a couple of things in there that you feel you'll pull votes from people who didn't vote for you before? What will appeal to them?
I appreciate the question. I think the main thing is, we want to really highlight that we're going to make sure that the ultra rich, the billionaires and millionaires, pay their fair share so we can invest that into people. And the invest into people, healthcare is key. We know that mental health has been really stretched thin, and lots of folks have talked to me about how they can't access mental health, and we want to make that a priority. We know that long-term care continues to be a big worry. We know the climate crisis is so urgent, and we can create good jobs that help us fight this crisis. So those are some of the big highlights. Housing is probably one of the biggest concerns I hear from everyone, from all walks of life, all income levels, and all parts of our country, remote, rural, Indigenous communities. Housing is really important. And the only way we can afford to pay for these really important investments is by making the ultra-rich pay their fair share. And we're committed to doing that.
Nous allons maintenant à Catherine Lévesque avec la presse canadienne. C'est à vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Singh.
Bonjour.
Mon collègue Alex Ballingle avait une excellente question tout à l'heure, donc je me permets de la reposer en français.
Oui.
Évidemment, beaucoup de promesses dans votre plateforme électorale et on espère les payer en taxant les ultra-riches. Justement, on n'a pas de plateforme électorale chiffrée en ce moment, on n'a pas d'estimé des coûts. Donc, à quel point êtes-vous confiant d'être capable de payer toutes vos promesses et d'assurer une relance économique là, grâce à ces augmentations d'impôts?
On est le seul parti avec une solution crédible pour investir dans les services que les gens ont besoin. Parce qu'on est le seul parti qui dit clairement qu'on doit s'assurer que les autres riches payent le juste part. Sans avoir cette conversation et cet engagement, les autres partis ne peuvent pas avoir aucune promesse pour avoir des investissements sans avoir deux autres résultats. Ils vont couper les services qui existent maintenant ou ils vont augmenter la pression sur les épaules des travailleurs et travailleuses ou des petites entreprises. On est le seul parti avec une solution qui dit les autres riches, les ultra-riches doivent payer le juste part pour investir dans les gens.
Et puis, plusieurs de vos promesses phares ont été reprises par les libéraux, qu'on pense, service de garde, la carboneutralité d'ici 2050, les logements sociaux, etc. Si je me mets à la place de monsieur, madame, tout le monde, ça peut devenir un peu mélangeant, là, entre les engagements du NPD et du Parti libéral. Je me demandais comment est-ce que vous allez faire en sorte que les électeurs soient capables de faire la différence entre votre parti et le parti qui est au pouvoir actuellement?
Une simple différence, les libéraux, Justin Trudeau dit beaucoup et fait rien, ou effectivement ne prend pas les gestes nécessaires pour régler les problèmes. Et avec les grands problèmes dans la vie des gens, la situation s'empirait depuis que Justin Trudeau était le premier ministre. La crise climatique s'empirait depuis les 600. C'était plus mauvais, c'était pire, la situation était pire. Avec le logement, la crise du logement, la situation était pire. Je demande la question aux gens. Depuis les 600 que Justin Trudeau était au pouvoir, est-ce qu'il a rendu votre vie plus abordable, oui ou non? La réponse sera non, parce qu'il n'a pas agi. La différence, c'est on est prêt pour prendre les gestes concrets. On a un plan crédible pour taxer les ultra-riches, pour payer pour les investissements, pour aider les gens. Et avec toutes ces promesses, notre différence, notre bilan pendant cette pandémie, c'était on a montré la preuve, on a forcé le gouvernement de doubler les PCU, d'augmenter la subvention salariale, de mettre en œuvre un programme de congé des maladies payées, d'aider les étudiants. On a un bilan où on a réussi à accomplir les gains pour les gens et les libéraux ont un bilan où ils ont dit beaucoup, promis beaucoup, et n'ont pas livré la marchandise.
We'll now go to Manaka Raman Wilms with the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Thank you for taking our questions. Hi. You've been very focused on connecting with young Canadians, engaging with them on social media in lots of different ways. In this new document, one of the things it outlines how you would lower the voting age to 16. But I'm wondering, can you just go over some of the other things in this new commitment document that will help young Canadians especially?
Absolutely. We've heard a lot of young people that talk about the worries that they have about the debt that they've graduated with. A lot of young people are graduating with massive debts. I think about when I went to law school, at the time, my tuition fee was $8,000 a year, and now law school often is over $30,000 a year. It's expanded astronomically. The debt is really difficult. So we had started off very clearly saying we should not be charging any interest whatsoever on student debt. The federal government should not be charging that. But we also want to go beyond that to debt forgiveness. That's really going to help out a lot of students by forgiving their debt. We know that young people are worried about the future. They're worried about the impacts of the climate crisis. And we are committed to fighting that climate crisis like we really want to win it by creating good jobs. And that's something that speaks to young people. Young people tell me often about their worries about mental health and the fact that young people, I think, have been really hard hit by this pandemic in a way that's impacted them much more than many other demographics. Young people have felt the pain of this pandemic, and it's impacted their mental health. So we are committing to expanding our healthcare to include mental health. Cell phone and internet fees, the costs have gone up and have been really expensive. We're talking about how to make that more affordable for everybody, but that's definitely going to help young people and everyone who needs now the internet to access everything in our lives, from our work to school to our services. We're committed also to making sure people have a home that's in their budget, a place to call home that they can actually afford. That's something that a lot of young people can't imagine right now. They can't imagine ever finding a place to rent, let alone to own. And we know that we can make things better by investing really massively in building those homes that people can actually afford. And so those are some of the things I think will speak directly to young people and their hopes for the future.
Great, thank you. And just as a follow-up, how optimistic are you that young voters will show up to the polls for the NDP? And could you outline a few of the ridings maybe where you think that youth vote could really make a difference for the party?
Certainly, I'm going to put it out here right now. I am confident, 100% confident, young people will make history in this next election. We have seen young people always, historically, at the forefront of social justice movements, of fighting for justice, fighting for fairness. Young people have always been at the forefront. And we've seen it recently in the past number of years with the climate crisis. Young people took to the streets in big marches. With Black Lives Matter movements, people took to the streets demanding justice. With the Indigenous justice movement, we've seen young people take to the streets. So I am confident young people will make history, and young people will make history in ridings across this country. Everywhere across this country will see their impact.
Nous allons maintenant à la dernière question. Now we're going to the last question. Ça sera avec Hélène Buzetti avec l'École de l'information. C'est à vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Singh. J'aimerais
Bonjour.
revenir à une question qu'un de mes collègues a posée sur le passeport vaccinal. Corrigez-moi si je me trompe, mais vous aviez vraiment l'air de parler d'un document pour voyager, bon, à l'étranger, mais aussi à l'intérieur du Canada. Or, quand on parle de passeport, on parle aussi d'un document qui permettrait d'avoir accès à certains endroits, par exemple des salles de spectacle, des restaurants, des bars. Sur cette question, j'aimerais vous entendre. Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord, vous, d'interdire l'accès à certains lieux, à certains types d'événements pour les personnes qui ne sont pas vaccinées? Merci.
Merci. Donc, la décision d'interdire les gens dans les événements, c'est une juridiction provinciale et je reconnais cette juridiction. Et ce que je dis, c'est, premièrement, si le gouvernement fédéral veut créer un document pour les voyages internationaux, pourquoi pas créer un document qui peut être utilisé pour les voyages domestiques ici au Canada, pour quelqu'un qui veut voyager au Québec, qui vit des murs en Ontario. C'est important d'avoir un outil facile à utiliser pour les gens. Donc, j'encourage le gouvernement libéral de créer un document qui pourrait être utilisé à travers le pays. Et avec la question d'interdire les gens, oui ou non, comme j'ai dit souvent, je suis les conseils des experts en matière de santé publique et je suis ouvert à cette question parce que je veux protéger les gens. Je veux avoir une approche qui augmente la sécurité pour les gens et je suis ouvert aux décisions pour suivre les conseils des experts en matière de santé publique qui protègent la population et je veux avoir les outils pour la rendre plus facile de faire.
Vous dites que vous êtes ouvert, mais est-ce que philosophiquement, c'est quelque chose avec laquelle vous êtes confortable? Certaines personnes parlent que c'est une violation des droits de la personne, le droit à la vie privée, la protection des renseignements. Philosophiquement, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ça? Et j'ajouterais, si vous me permettez, M. Trudeau a dit qu'il songeait à rendre même la vaccination obligatoire pour certains employés de l'État, par exemple. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez? Merci.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Donc, mes valeurs, c'est je suis un défendeur des droits de la personne, mais aussi je comprends l'importance des droits collectifs. Pour bâtir une meilleure société, on prend souvent des décisions qui sont avantageuses pour la collectivité, pour nos intérêts, pour le bien commun. Et c'est une de mes valeurs. C'est pourquoi je veux investir dans les soins de santé, par exemple, parce que je crois fermement, si on prend soin les uns des autres, on crée une meilleure société. C'est important, c'est mes valeurs. Donc, je suis ouvert parce que je pense qu'on peut trouver une façon d'avoir un équilibre entre ces deux demandes, mais c'est important toujours de penser de bien commun, comment on peut créer une société plus sécure, sécuritaire et comment on peut protéger la population. Ça, c'est important. Et avec la question des vaccins mandatoires, oui, je suis ouvert à cette question parce que pour plusieurs milieux de travail, c'est essentiel d'être vacciné et c'est important qu'on est ouvert à cette question et cette recommandation. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. This concludes our press conference. Ceci met fin à notre conférence de presse. Bonne journée.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Merci. Sure, yeah, in English on that. I'm open to it. I think that there is, the question was around balancing personal liberties, individual freedoms, and collective good. And I'm someone who fiercely believes in defending our personal freedoms. I think it's absolutely important. But I also very strongly believe in our collective common and our important role that we play in taking care of one another. And I believe in that. That's why I believe in things like universal health care and universal pharmacare. So there's a way to balance that. And I absolutely am open to requiring where it's there's serious risk, working with the unions and workers that are involved. But mandatory vaccination is something that I'm very open to. Yeah, I'm open to it, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of places where it should be done. So I'm very open to it. Yeah. Thanks so much. Merci. Thank you, everybody. Merci. I'll come around and say hi to you. I'll get my mask back on.